Hey, let's talk about games. Hello my friends, you're listening to Hydra, and today I'm going to be running through a Crusader build video for you. Now this is going to be a little bit different to the previous Assassin build. This is going to be a little bit more of a template and something that's a bit more of a concept that you can play around with, and we'll talk through a few build variations so you can actually make this into something a little bit more personalised, but it's going to work, and it's going to work absolutely beautifully. The core philosophy behind this is it's going to work with the deflect mechanic. As you can see up here, 67% deflect. If you're wondering what deflect is, it's basically a dodge. It means you will deflect 67% of the attacks coming towards you. So, in order to make the most of this, we're going to be using this perk here, which is a 100% deflect bonus with melee weapons. Now, you do sacrifice 20% armor reduction, but it's a fairly good trade because we also have the damage bonus percent equal to your deflect value, which is 67% in this case. So I have a whopping amount of extra damage coming just from this perk, which is amazing. Now, the third perk is actually one that you could be flexible with. There are quite a few that could suit this. I had been dabbling with a critical hit based Crusader build. You could quite easily go for something like crisis management, however, if you wanted to go for a more tanky orientated build, meaning you would take less damage at low health. You could easily go for something like armor usage, giving you a damage bonus for a little while, making you very good at taking out single targets. You could use that with something like the assault pack. There's quite a few that you could be picking from, and obviously this is built more towards a melee, but you could even technically have a deflect based range tank. That could probably work, so you could even go with some ranged options here, but there really are quite a few that you could pick from, and I'm not going to tell you which one. I'm going to let you have a little experiment here, but for me personally, 10% critical hit chance, sacrificing 400 hit points, I can live with that because 10% crit is pretty damn awesome. Now, in terms of what I'm spending over here, the 10 points into warfare is pretty much essential. You don't really have to go above that, but it will give you 5% bonus to deflect attacks, which is 5% extra damage as well. So that's just 10 points incredibly well spent. Now, if you keep going, you will get bonus to movement speed, and then you will get the critical chance bonus, which is why I'm going to pursue this, because, hey, I just like critical chance. But you could quite easily spec this in elsewhere into toughness or even virtue if you wanted to chase some of these other buffs. Now let's go on to skills and talk about how we actually make this character work. If we start off with a defense tree, one of the ways we get even more for our deflect is plus 50% from shields. So not only are we getting plus 100% for all of the melee, which applies to the shield as well, so everything is doubled, we also get plus 50% from the shield, and this is where a lot of this deflect comes from. Now obviously that we're gearing a little bit more towards using a shield based build. You'll see here if I bring up the character sheet again and we go over here, we go back to the inventory and we equip a weapon. Now you'll see our deflect is only 41, so having that shield equipped really does make a hell of a difference. There you go, back up to 69. Much, much better, giggity. So that is nigh on essential for this build. It is incredibly valuable, and even though I've gimped my armor by 20%, damage reduction increased by 20%, it's pretty good still. It's pretty good. It's some nice damage mitigation. It's just there. You've got a big old pool of hit points. It's going to be useful. Now, the rest of these hit points aren't 100% essential, but I would advise them. Another core part of this build is speccing into a few of these abilities. Now, over here, if we go up, we get some extra melee damage. We get another 7% during single duels and another 7% if we're dueling more than 3 opponents or 3 or more. But over here, we have successful deflects provide a stacking 5% damage bonus to the next attack, maximum 50. So this means that if you're taking lots and lots of range damage, it's not going to take too long to stack that up, and you're going to get another 50% to that first hit. So you want to start with a big whack against an enemy, especially if you get a critical hit. You'll really see the difference. Now, I would probably also move into grants 20% damage bonus to melee skills up here when you drop below on health. It's just exceptionally useful. You could certainly move along to have all melee kills granting 20% movement speed. That's quite useful. And up here, I do like to have critical hits in melee providing a stacking vulnerability to the target. This is mainly for taking down those dreadnoughts, those sentinels, and the more you attack them, the more damage you're going to do. It's pretty useful for only 3 points, but obviously if you don't have any critical hit, it might not be the best thing to invest into. A comparable ability, and all of the melee weapons for the Crusader are physical based, is to go along here right to the end, and eventually you'll get to this where you could do naturally 10% extra damage every single time you hit an enemy anyway, although if you hit another one it obviously resets it, but this is very good again for taking down those sentinels and dreadnoughts, so things that might take a while. Now, moving on from here, we also have the support focus regeneration. So I go with the assault packs. It's got the most armor, so I can fly around and have a bit of mobility, but having this extra focus regeneration is pretty handy because it just allows you to use the ability a lot more often, and you just get a lot of use out of it. Down in the hit points down here, we have every successful deflect giving you 5 suppression points back, which is less than what the assassin gets, which I feel is a little unfair. However, it's more than enough. It's enough to give you plenty of suppression regen based on this deflect mechanic, so it's incredibly strong. This will keep your suppression topped up more or less on its own until you ramp the difficulty up a hell of a lot. And I'm also going to be speccing into the usual sort of heals a character for 1 hit point for every 10 suppression points regained, which is just exceptionally good. And I'm also going to be going into, for every 10 points of health you gain your suppression. That's really just to make sure your suppression stays nice and topped up. So very, very nice, very, very handy. I have to say I'm not sure how often you will be healing with this, so you could potentially take these 4 points out and place them elsewhere. Now, the leftovers for this build, we have 24 points left over. This is, of course, assuming you're level 50. And the rest of the points are really going to be situational depending on what item you're going to be using. So I've been rocking, now I quite like the sword. The second ability is on quite a low cooldown, so it's got some very nice conal effect, wide swiping ability. However, I much prefer the power axe. Reason being is the primary attack on it is armor breaking, as well as still having critical strike, and it applies a bleed, and the damage is higher. So overall, single target damage to power axe for me is where it's at. However, you do a slight trade-off with the wide strike being a 3-second cooldown instead of the 1 second for a power sword. So that's the difference there. You could obviously go for a hammer. I don't have one here on me. Oh, there we go, I lied. This is very, very useful too. It's also armor piercing, so high single target damage, and it has knockback and a stun. Now, you can use each of these abilities or each of these weapons in a totally different way. If you wanted to pursue the, say, axe and critical hit route, you could certainly go into criticals here. If you wanted to use a single-handed axe, you could probably go into the debuff tree as well and go 3, 6, 9, 12% damage there. Again, for the axe is one ability, and that would also apply to the hammer. You could also go down here and get yourself 10% maximum suppression resist when stunning or knocking back enemies if you wanted to use the hammer. That way, every single time you hit an enemy, you're going to be getting a chunk of life back, which is going to be useful once the difficulty starts going up. You could even combine something like this to regen your suppression, down with the hit point, the defense tree down here, and chase up this, giving you 25% damage mitigation extra, taking it from your suppression instead. Now, this does make your suppression go down quite fast. That is something to consider, but that's something you could mess around with. You could even, for the axe, because both abilities apply a dot, you could even go into applying a bleed with the axe, so bleeding enemies are now slowed. Then you could go back to the close combat tree, put another 2 points in here, and hey presto, whenever something is bleeding, it will also have a dot on it, and then you will do an extra 5, 10, 15, 20% damage because it's bleeding and therefore slowed. Of course, provided that you've lowered their suppression down. Now, if we go over to the physical attacks, you could even spam in here, because I do think this one is very, 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 very valuable. This is just exceptionally good, and this also works very well with the axe, because you've also got bleeding effects last longer, and also plus 10% damage against bleeding enemies, so it's just very good. So what I'm actually going to do right now is put some points in here. Extra damage there, absolutely fantastic. This one, it's useful on the axe's AoE, but not useful enough to put points into. If we just make the rest of this build here, we're now slowing enemies too. Slowed enemies going to be taking that extra damage from up here, taking that extra 10%. Now we've got ourselves 9 points left to play with. The truth is that this is the part where you get to have a little bit of fun. I would probably go along here, get yourself every focus point healing you, so that way I've got a little bit more heals coming in. Now, these last 6 points really are flexible. They really, really are. You could definitely go for single target DPS if you wanted. Extra 4, extra 1.5 there. That's going to give you a bit of extra damage there. You could maybe even try and top off the close combat tree here to get some extra stacking damage too. Really, you've got lots of options. Critical hit, we could obviously put 6 points in here and try and pick up a few sneaky bits of critical hit. The extra 5% here is not too bad. You could probably do critical hits giving you a focus point. Just keep in mind that we're down to 17% crit now, so it's not too high. But thankfully, thanks to this perk, we've got that extra 10% coming in. So guys, lots and lots of choice for this build, but I hope you find the core very, very useful, and I hope it gives you some ideas onto how to create your own builds. Truly, I think the deflect build is king at the moment within the game, and I wouldn't be surprised once we reach the end zone, the war zone, when it comes in, if the majority of Crusaders are going to be running heavy deflect-based builds for now. But if you've got a build that you think can beat this, I want you to see you down in the comments below. I want to know what you guys are rocking, what do you find useful, what do you enjoy, and one last thing to consider, don't worry, you don't have to use the suppression shield. You can also use a lightning shield or a storm shield, sorry, and it does the same blooming thing. It's just as good. So you can still have that extra dash if you really don't like the AoE suppression shield. Guys, even with this crappy gear, I'm running impossible turrets without any fuss at all. I hope you find the video useful. Take care and all the best.